In the previous video of the Where to Start series, we talked about the Nintendo Switch. But with us being on the verge of a new console generation, I thought it would be fun to go back and talk about an older system. Today we'll look at the Sony PlayStation 2, the best-selling home console in the world. Whether you're interested in perhaps collecting for the system, or just curious about, differences in hardware between models, whatever it may be, in this video we're going to take a look at the PS2 from several angles and hopefully cover a lot of topics. And while we can't go into every single avenue in depth, this video will still give you a good perspective of what the PS2 is about. The PS2 was released in the year 2000. Depending which part of the world we're talking about here, the exact release date could have been anywhere between the beginning and the end of the year. I remember being at school and someone bringing in a magazine with an article about the, at the time, soon-to-be-released PS2. I thought it looked so cool and futuristic sitting vertically like that. Back then it was quite the unique look since consoles were usually set flat to the ground. I found the beginning of the Gen 6 console era to be really exciting. The Nintendo 64 and PlayStation heralded the beginning of the 3D era on consoles, and the next generation would be pushing things even further. I'll never forget my first exposure to 6th gen gaming. It was 1999 in Markov. You Germans will know what that is. There it was, a display unit running the latest 3D Sonic game. Yes, it was a Dreamcast. The graphics were PC-like, and it just looked so good. Little did I know that my first Generation 6 experience would be with a console that would ultimately be discontinued in less than 2 years. Somehow it was Sony, at the time still a newcomer when it came to consoles, who would ultimately sell the most consoles with their PlayStation 2. Unlike the Dreamcast, the PS2 had a very long life, 2000 to 2013, so that's 13 years. Over those years, the system was revised and refreshed in several ways. The most obvious distinction between the models is the fat and the slim versions. If you have a couple of games and just want to play them, then you're probably alright with whatever PS2 you can, get your hands on. But there are reasons why you might want to consider different models. But it's not just about choosing one or the other, fat or slim, as within those two categories there are variations. As you may know, the laser is always the thing you've got to watch out for with these older disc-based consoles. But in terms of reliability, there doesn't seem to be a clear consensus on which models are better than others. Throughout the years, the system received upgraded lasers, which presumably should be better than the older ones, yet some people still believe that slim models are less reliable. Hours of use plays such a big role on the degradation of lasers, and with systems that are potentially 10 or in some cases almost 20 years old, we have to take into consideration that stuff just breaks due to age. It's a bit like buying a 20 or 30-year-old car. Sometimes cars of the same era, can be in great condition while others are like crashed or run into the ground. At that point, you can't really go by age, mileage or hours of use or whatever. You have to approach things at a case-by-case basis. That being said, there are reasons to look for specific PS2 models. With the exception of early JDM models, every fat PS2 has a hard drive bay. You need the network adapter in order to install a hard drive, which is something you may want for modding purposes. Slim models, on the other hand, are reversed. They all have network adapters built in, but no space for a hard drive. But if you want to soft mod your PS2 and have it access games through your local network, then a Slim makes sense. Something else that you might want to consider is PS1 compatibility. Earlier models have generally better PS1 compatibility compared to Slim models, and there's even a Wikipedia article about that. Now's probably a good time to bring up some version numbers. There's two naming conventions, which is always fun. One is from Sony, which is numbered on the console itself. They're all in the 10,000s. Mine, for example, is 75,001. The last number denotes the region, so in this case it's a North American 75,000 series PS2. Over the years, enthusiasts and modders have come up with a version naming scheme that goes from V0 to V1, V2, and so on until V18. There's a site, which is actually currently down, but can be accessed through the Wayback Machine that has a table. The differences between the versions is often down to things like bias and, other revisions. Sometimes Sony would redesign the internals to make, mod chips harder to install, for example, and things like that. And those changes aren't necessarily reflected by the version number provided by Sony. Most people don't need to go that deep into it, but if you have some specific goal in mind when it comes to modding, then it might be a good idea to look into. The topic of PS2 games is incredibly vast. Since the system was so successful, everything you can think of has been made for the system. There's so many iconic games like Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy X and X-2, Gran Turismo 3 and 4, Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, as well as the two other ones to make that trilogy there, several GTA games. The list goes on and on. Searching the web for best PS2 games will give you a decent idea of what's out there. Some of my favorites that not everybody mentions are Disgaea, a strategy RPG with over-the-top attacks, deep gameplay, and wacky characters. Okami is, well, it's amazing. Very Zelda-like in many ways, with an amazing art style. Grim Grimoire is a PS2 exclusive that is often overlooked. It's a real-time strategy game, and it's Vanillaware's first release. While other games from Vanillaware like Odin Sphere were actually, eventually released on newer systems, Grim Grimoire never was. So that's a good hidden gem. There's just a lot of stuff here on the system, and it's been quite influential to me. Gran Turismo 4, for example, is a game that sparked my interest in Japanese cars. To me, that's the last game of the series that has that classic Gran Turismo magic. I'll never forget all those days of watching best motoring and hot version videos on streetfire.net, and then buying the cars in Gran Turismo so I could race them on Scuba Circuit and all those places. One thing I like to do, which may surprise some people, is to play some of the older sports games. Because most people don't really play old sports games, they're dirt cheap. But they give an insight into how games evolve. So I think it's an interesting thing. I also think they're a great way to find interesting music. To me, one of the best things about FIFA is seeing what songs are on the soundtrack each year. One thing to keep in mind is that some games run better on different systems. You know how it is. It's always been that way. That's especially true with later PS2 releases. In fact, in some cases, like with Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, the PS2 version is its own thing with different level designs, because the hardware couldn't handle it. One of my friends in high school had the PS2 version, and I have the PC game myself, and I remember being quite surprised at the difference. It was like some sort of alternate reality situation, because the levels felt really familiar, but some rooms were just at different locations. If I remember correctly, the GameCube version needed to be tweaked in a similar fashion, for basically similar reasons. But yeah, there's a ton of games. Like I said, all you need to do is look at some top PS2 games lists on YouTube or Google, and you're going to have a pretty big list of games to choose from. In terms of accessories, there's a few ones I recommend. It may seem really obvious, but it's always a good idea to stock up on controllers. You can also get PS1 controllers, but not all of those features will work on PS2s. For example, the rumble on the dual analog controller, which came before the DualShock, doesn't work on the PS2. And none of the PS1 controllers have analog buttons, and I feel those are quite important on games like Gran Turismo. If you're into fighting games or other arcade-style games, then I recommend looking for fighting sticks too. You may even want to put one together yourself like I did several years ago. If you do, then you have the advantage of installing a board that can be used on many systems, new and old. Of course, a couple of memory cards are a good thing. I have no idea how good or bad aftermarket ones are, but I'm sure there are some that work fine. If you don't want to guess, get some official Sony ones. If you're going to play some sports games, try to dedicate some memory cards for those, as save games can get pretty huge. I make sure to back up my saves to another memory card as well. I don't want to lose those hundreds of hours invested into Disgaea. A bit less obvious when it comes to accessories might be AV cables. The first step is to take that composite cable and throw it out the window. Unless that's your only cable, then maybe hang on to it for now. There's a number of options when it comes to cables. There's different options for different regions, in other words, PAL or NTSC. Of course, the display you're going to connect your console to will often dictate which cable you're going to use. I'm very much on the if it's analog, then CRT TV train. I'm quite happy having a component cable between my PS2 and Sony Trinitron TV. I don't have a NTSC TV that accepts S-video, but there are people who prefer it. While I can't confirm this, some people claim that the slightly softer image helps create a smoother blending of colors in 2D games and pixely textures. But the difference between S-video and component is much smaller than composite to either of those two. So whatever you choose, that's going to be a much better option. If you live in Europe or other PAL regions, then you should really be looking for a SCART cable. If you're looking at connecting the PS2 to an LCD screen, prepare to be disappointed. It's going to look pretty ugly compared to a tube TV, no matter which cable you use. That being said, I've played my PS2 on an LCD TV for years and had fun, so if that's the only option, don't let that keep you from having fun and playing games. Now, this is something I'm not experienced with, but I want to at least mention that it's something you can look into, and that is upscaling. If you want to go this route, the cheapest way to go about it is with emulators. You'll have much more control on how the graphics are processed, so if you want, you can play around with parameters other than just resolution. PCSX2 has always been my PS2 emulator of choice, and I'm pretty sure that's what most people use. In terms of hardware upscalers, there's always the ever-popular and ever-expensive FrameMeister. Thankfully, people have been getting good results with other, much cheaper upscalers as well. There's a bunch on Amazon and eBay that connect to the console's AV out port. The other end has an HDMI port, and usually a 3.5mm audio out. It's best to do some research on them. Looking through some Reddit threads and forum posts, it does seem that certain TVs won't accept certain resolutions that some of these upscalers output. We talked a little bit about modding already when we were looking at the hardware revisions. These days, it's fairly simple to soft mod a PS2. Get a memory card with free MC boot on it from eBay or something, and away you go. Or as I call it, free mech boot. This is something I'm going to do, but I haven't done it yet. I'd like to run games over the network, that way I don't have to put any more stress on the frickin' laser. I use a bit of an old school method currently to play burnt game discs, as well as make the system region free. I've got swap magic, 3.6 I think. With this, you need to fool your PS2 into thinking its lid is closed, because once the disc spins up and loads, it stops and then you swap out the disc. Hence, swap magic. There's two modifications I've done to my PS2. The first one is a switch on the top, which I jammed something into to make it think that the lid is closed. The other place is inside. There's a switch that I ripped out and replaced with a wire so that the circuit is always closed. There's other things you can do with modding like emulators and other things, but my primary goal is to run games without having to use the optical drive. When I do get around to doing that, I'll share that process with you here on the channel. The Sony PlayStation 2. It's the most successful home console ever. Sony managed to really make use of the momentum they gained with the first PlayStation. But it's not just the games. The PS2 is the reason that consoles are now multimedia devices that do more than gaming. The fact that it could play DVDs was such a big deal, and its form factor that could be adapted to either vertical or horizontal positioning ensured that it would integrate in many people's living rooms. In this video, we managed to talk about a bunch of topics regarding the system. Hopefully you found it helpful or just entertaining to watch. If you have anything to add, feel free to comment, and please share some of your PS2 memories. I mentioned my Gran Turismo bit there, and I'm sure a lot of you have similar memories, whether it's Gran Turismo or other games. It's always nice to think about fond memories as well. If you liked the video and like what I do, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon like these fine people here. You get behind the scenes videos, news, and updates, and also early access to videos. Getting merch is also something that helps the channel, so consider that as well. You can also find me at places like Twitter and other places on the web. Links are all in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.